Hello all! For the last 5 years or so, before even thinking of making a YouTube channel, I started hunting down parts that I couldn't afford when they were new, just for myself. I knew then that the HD 3850 was considered the fastest AGP graphics card, but I'd also seen posts here and there talking about this mythical AGP 4670, saying it was just as fast, if not faster, so I had to find out for myself. There's only one video I can find comparing these two cards, and I'll link it in the top right, but I figure the more comparative performance info the better, and clearly people are interested as that video has had 67,000 views. Of course, it may also have something to do with the channel having 56,000 subscribers. As I've now done videos on each card where I try to find the best drivers, I can use those results to install the best performing ones for each so they can show their best. That means I'm using the same Catalyst 8.65 drivers on both cards. So in a shameless tie-in with today's Coronation, let's see which of these two earns the performance crown for AGP. The reigning monarch or the wannabe usurper? I'm trying to rely on real-world game benchmarks more than synthetics, but it wouldn't be a benchmark comparison without 3D Mark tests. In 3D Mark 2001, the 3850 is off to a good start with a 2,300 point difference, which is only 5%. 3D Mark 03 increases the lead with an extra 6,600 points, being an astounding 24% difference. 05 gives a lower improvement for the 3850, being only about 12% faster. And lastly, 3D Mark 06 puts the 3850 almost 2,000 points in their lead with a 23% increase. Far Cry 2 is a bizarre result, with the 4670 being between 60 and 80% faster. I retested many times, reinstalled the drivers, switched cards over, and it was the same result each time. I'll assume this is down to the extra memory the 4670 has for textures. Half-Life 2 Lost Coast with everything as high as it goes was a bit of a surprise, as again the 4670 comes out on top. I retested and retested, but it was always the same. The 4670 is about 14% faster. Welding Conflict has the 3850 resulting higher across the board, being about 21% faster in all metrics. The 3850 leaves Crysis with lower minimum frame counts than the 4670, but the average and high scores make up for it. Fear clocks in a 50% lead over the 4670 for minimums, and at 1080p with all settings to maximum is about 20 FPS faster for high frame count scores. For Doom 3, I'm using the Hardware OC third-party benchmark. It's another victory for the 3850, although there isn't a huge amount in it. 10 FPS faster on ultra settings. The X3 Reunion benchmark seems not to care which card is used, but if we're keeping score, it gives it to the 4670, by a third of a frame per second. Half-Life 2 gives another rare win to the 4670, which is no surprise after the Lost Coast benchmark. It looks like a 10 to 20 FPS lead at the most, so I think the extra half a gig of video RAM is finally getting used again. I discovered that Dirt 2 has a benchmark mode in its demo. It only wants to run at 1080p, and its default setting makes it quite demanding. As you can see, there isn't much in the averages, but the minimum scores on the 3850 are 30% higher. Moving to Company of Heroes, and with 1080p maximum settings, there isn't a lot in it really, so we should probably move on to Quake 3. Here the time demo is completed in 2.1 seconds by the 3850, pumping out 28% more FPS. A few more synthetic benchmarks here in the form of the Unengine Tropics and Sanctuary titles. The 3850 pulls ahead between 12 and 18% faster depending on which test is run. Lost Planet 2 benchmark propels the older card forward again with a commanding 28% performance lead. Next up is Dawn of War 2. Much like the other RTS, Company of Heroes, there isn't a huge difference at 1080p, but the 8 FPS lead translates into 13% higher performance for max FPS. Lastly, I found a Street Fighter benchmark which gives the 3850 a whole 3 FPS lead, which isn't much, but it's still another win. On paper, the 4670 has all the makings of being a far better card than the 3850. It has a faster GPU clock speed, twice the memory, and twice the amount of texture mapping units. It looks like it should be a big win over the 3850, but that's when you find it has half the render output units, half the cache, and half the memory speed interface, effectively crippling it into being far less than it could have been and only really winning any victories here as it has more memory for textures. That said, the 4670 does have some quality of life improvements over the 3850. It has an HDMI socket, uses a lot less power, it's a shorter card, and it's also so quiet I had to check the card to make sure the fan was spinning. So in this ATI civil war, the 3850 has kept its crown as the one true AGP performance king. Right, I'm off to join in the street celebrations outside in my road. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!